Katie, let it out with Katie. Let it out with Katie Dalebout, enthusiast and curator of people and ideas you need to hear.
Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. You are listening to Let It Out with me. I'm Katie, your host, and this is the podcast where I interview creative people, interesting people, smart people, funny people, people that I just want to have a conversation with, like today's guest, Dan Lerner. And I found out about Dan a couple months ago because he teaches the most popular elective class at NYU. And it's called The Science of Happiness. And in addition to being a professor and teaching that class, he has extensively studied psychology and positive psychology, which we get into in this episode, and he tells me about the history of psychology and how positive psychology became a thing. It's very, very interesting, that specific part of the conversation. We talk about social media, we talk about relationships, we of course talk about the science of happiness and peak performance, because he's a peak performance coach who just wrote a book called You Thrive: How to Succeed in College and Life. And anyway, I just really liked this guy. He was super nice, and I'm going to get to that episode really soon, so you'll hear all about him. Anyway, before that, I want to talk about our sponsor. The sponsor of this week's episode is Care of Vitamins. You guys, I love Care of Vitamins. You probably love them as well by this point because they've been a sponsor for a while. And, you know, the best thing about them being a sponsor, really, to be honest, is that you get to try them for 50% off your first order using the code Katie. So probably a lot of you have tried them already. And if you have, you know that you go to takecareof.com, and on that website, you take a quiz. And this quiz is fantastic. It's much like a personality test, which, side note, we talk a lot about a new personality test in this episode, which I'll tell you about in a second. But anyway, we're talking about Care of right now. And I love taking a good personality test. And this one is special because what this one does is it asks you questions about your lifestyle, your diet, your energy levels, your skin, your digestion, how often you're pooping. And from there, it curates for you the exact combination of vitamins that your body needs to feel energized, feel productive, feel happy. And then it sends you in the mail these beautiful packaged boxes. And within the boxes are these little containers that say your name on them, which, you know, we love personalized things. So that's a pro. And then also, you know, you don't have to take all of your ugly supplement bottles. And I mean, they're not ugly, but they're just, you know, clutter. And you don't have to open them all up separately. Put your vitamins in a little container. Remember to take them with you when you're traveling. Remember to take them with you when you're going to the work or the coffee shop or, you know, wherever the cool places you guys are going. Instead, you just get to take the little individualized packet that says your name, has the highest quality ingredients of vitamins in them that are exactly what your body needs, and you just throw it in your bag, your purse, your backpack. I don't know what you carry, but you can just put one of your Care of supplement containers right in there, or you put 5 of them in there for the whole week and just switch them out on Sundays, whatever you want to do. Anyway, I love Care of Vitamins. It actually saves you money on buying supplements because you buy what you actually need, which is fantastic. So remember to go to takecareof.com, that's takecareof.com, and use the code Katie, Katie. That's my name, it's also the code, and that gives you 50% off. 50%, that is half of the percent off. You guys, I'm very passionate about this. I love them, and I want them to keep supporting the podcast. I want them to support your body. I want them to support my body's health. So, you know, it helps out the podcast if you try them. If you've been thinking about trying them, but you weren't sure, this is the week to do it. Try it. Use the code. It lets them know that we sent you. And anyway, I want to get to this conversation with Dan, but I mentioned a personality test other than the Care of one. And this one is called the VIA Strengths Test, and you learn your signature strengths. And what I like about this test is that it focuses on the positive instead of the negative. And you'll hear Dan and I, he's the one that told me about this, and we talk all about this in this week's episode, but I wanted to make sure I actually took the personality test before I recorded this, I was going to say theme song, before I recorded this intro, because I wanted to tell you guys what mine was. And, I'll just tell you at the end of the episode. It's making you listen to the end. But you know what? Listen to the end where I tell you what my signature strengths are. And I will also tell you the emoji for the episode. It's a great one this week, I think. And how much I love you and, just some other things. So I'll talk to you guys then. Enjoy this episode with Dan. I've been liking starting the podcast recently before we get into your work and your background and then kind of your future vision and, the future and the past, basically. I like to start in the present. So what have you been learning lately, realizing, or just contemplating in the last, today or the last week or maybe month, but as present as you can go?
Oh, wow. Well, this book of mine, the first book is coming out in about 3 weeks. So that's been it's been on my mind pretty consistently, I have to say. One constantly thinks about, at least I constantly think about what's the impact that I'm having? What are the opportunities here to reach out and help people? And the more I think through what we've written, the more I think through what we're going to be doing tomorrow and next month and the month after that, I think that for me, it's really just about it's just been about thinking about how people flourish, in such unique ways. For me, I've been fascinated by how people flourish in unique ways, how every individual is different. But the more that I've been able to think about this, think about the students who are reading it, the parents who are reading it, think about the work that I do in the classroom, the people I encounter on the street, just how unique every opportunity is. So it's been really fun to be particularly mindful about that.
Cool. Yeah. Well, you're a professor of psychology and you teach one of the most popular elective classes at NYU, which I want to get into. But first, let's start with have you always been into psychology? Did you know that you wanted to be a professor? How did you kind of get started with things?
So technically, I am a clinical instructor at NYU. And I teach this class called The Science of Happiness, as you said. I will say this, it is not at all what I would have expected had you asked me what I would be doing 5 or 10, let's say 6, because I've been teaching this course for 5 years, but 6 or 10 or 15 or 40 years ago, not at all. The way that I found myself in this position was I started in music. I started in how do I put this? So my earliest memories in life were of music. My parents were both professional musicians. So I grew up in this household where they loved what they did. They did it at home. They brought music home. They played together. They played around the world. And so for me, I had this idea, I had this understanding that the way that people would thrive, would flourish in their life, would be by doing something that they loved, and also doing something that they had a particular talent in. And as I grew up, I played the cello growing up, and I thought this could be something that I do for the rest of my life. I always figured my life would be in music. And when I graduated from college, I should say at the end of my freshman year of college, I called my dad and I said, I think this is what I want to do for a living. I think I want to be a cellist. My father was in the Pittsburgh Symphony. He was a flute player, and he was thrilled. And he said, this is amazing, wonderful. We will do for you what my parents did for me. We'll support you. You come home from college, we'll support you for a year. And you practice every day from 9 to 5. And at the end of the year, you go audition for conservatories and music schools. And that will be how you find your way into a career as a musician. And I thought, wow, that sounds horrible. That is like the last thing I want to do in my life. Like, here I am at school and I have these amazing friends and it's a wonderful experience, and I'm writing for the paper and I have a radio show, and it was just way too fantastic to leave. So I thought, what is it that I'm going to do? I mean, clearly I'm not going to play. So I started exploring different avenues in the music business. I would work every summer, every spring break, every winter break at a music festival, an opera company, stage managing, fundraising, something. And one summer when I was working at the Santa Fe Opera, I met a bunch of agents. My mother happened to be singing there that summer as well, and she had agents, but I hadn't really spoken to her agents. And I met a bunch of agents, and I thought, wait a second, what you do for a living is you help young musicians develop their career and really be the very best they can be. I thought that's amazing. Like, what an amazing opportunity to get to help multiple people pursue something that I totally got, which was that drive to communicate with the world through music. So I went in the music business. That was my first job out of college. And sorry, go ahead.
No, so what in the music business were you doing?
I was an agent. I was an agent first at a company called Columbia Artists, and I was at ICM, representing mostly young opera singers. So taking singers out of young artist programs like the Metropolitan Opera, San Francisco, Chicago, conservatories and music schools. And for me, it was really about, how do I help this person live the most fulfilling life they can? For a lot of my colleagues, traditionally, as we understand agents, it's about how do I really help develop the best career? And totally understood. That's not I'm not meaning to put any agents down. That's what we do. But for me, I think growing up with my parents, it was, wait, this is the opportunity to really help someone's life. Mm-hmm. So I was representing these young people and helping them develop their careers and their lives. And I realized very early on that my perception of, as long as you're doing something successfully that you love, you'll be happy, was wrong. I had clients who were super successful, and they were everywhere that they could possibly be with their careers. They were all around the world, the whole thing, and they were happy. They had friends and family and or hobbies and or spiritual pursuits and or they were passionate about what they did in a really healthy way. But I also had these clients who were incredibly successful, equally successful, but not nearly as successful off stage. And you see, they would be miserable. They'd be depressed. They get calls at 3 a.m. from Paris or Milan, and them saying, I'm miserable. I'm depressed. I miss my family, or I don't have a family, or I don't have anything else in my life. And I thought, wait a second, there's a real issue here, and I'm fascinated by what's happening. So I left, and my career was going really, really well. And after 10 years in the business, I left, and I thought, I need to understand what the difference is between those people who are successful on stage and off, and those people who are successful on stage and really not successful off. And that is what took me towards psychology. At first, I looked into performance psychology, and then I went back to school and studied positive psychology. And it's really about bringing those two together. The course at NYU and everything that I do in life is really about how do people realize excellence in their life while integrating happiness, well-being, flourishing on the way towards realizing those levels of expertise, of excellence. Because I think that far too often in our culture, it's like, look, it's an either-or question. Do you want to be great? Do you want to be successful? Or do you want to be happy and do you want to be fulfilled? And it's really tricky to put them together, but I think what we're finding is that science is showing us that we actually have advantages when we pursue aspects of well-being, whether it's meaning or positive emotion or positive relationships or purpose or even achievement. And that's been thrown to the side. And I think now we're starting to find out that it shouldn't be. So I have this amazing opportunity to work with 1,000 students a year. My clients are wonderful, my coaching clients, but these students, and I look at them and say, listen, the folks that I used to work with and the folks I work with now are calling me when they're like twice your age, literally. They're in their mid-30s, and they're going, I'm super successful. I'm really not happy. What do I do? And I can look at these students and say, so I get you young. Let's figure out what habits and routines and practices you can develop right now that can integrate into the rest of your life so that you can pursue whatever you want to pursue at the highest possible level you want to pursue it, but also do so while being happy, by integrating friends, having healthy passions, so on and so forth. So I feel incredibly fortunate to be able to share that with them. Yeah,
and I want to get into some of those things, but before we do, going back to your story, so you decided to quit your job as an agent. Were you living in New York at the time?
I was. I moved to New York 2 days after graduating from college, and I've not left since.
Cool. Well, I want to talk about that too. I want to talk about living in the city. But so you study these two forms of psychology, and they seem very relevant to your work as an agent. So were you planning to take what you learned and go back to being an agent, or did you know that you would be a peak performance coach at that point?
As much as I love music more than maybe anything else, the other art form, certainly, activity. No, when I left, I was pretty sure that I wanted to understand how it worked for performers, period. Like whether you're performing on a stage, on an athletic field, on a podcast as an interviewer, as an academic, as a doctor, as a lawyer, as a mother, as a father. Like, we're talking about peak performance. I'm really curious about that across the board. It's something I've always been fascinated by. I've always been fascinated by super high level athletes. And I played sports growing up into college. Super high level musicians, super high level anythings. And I'd see one, and I'd sort of stop in my tracks and go, "That's amazing!
Yeah,
what's going on there?" So no, I knew that it would grow and expand.
So tell us a little bit about what that means to be a peak performance coach, and I guess I'd love to know. Well, yeah, start there, and then I have follow-up questions. So,
Sure.
Is it similar to being a therapist? How is it different, and how did you use your education that you got in those two forms of psychology?
I suppose the easiest way to, or the simplest way to differentiate between the two is that therapists are psychologists who will go back they'll go back into the history of someone's life, right? Far more often. So, the traditional, tell me about your mother, tell me about your father. Not that every therapist does this, but really what got you to this point where you've come, where you're having challenges, where you're having issues that you need to deal with in order to really be healthy again, to be thriving again. Coaches, at least from my perspective, I know there are many, many coaches out there. From my perspective, coaches are about where are you right now and where do you want to get to? It is not within my expertise to be able to diagnose someone's illness, nor is it my expertise to be able to really take from their past and be able to help them work through that. In my expertise, it's about what is it you're striving to achieve in any domain, and what does success look like to you? What does excellence look like to you? And then how do we really get there in a way that also integrates fulfillment, integrates well-being into your path? So it's easy for someone to come to a performance coach and say, I want to be the best player on the field. But it's very different than coming and saying, I want to be the best player that I can be, and I also want to live a life that is really fulfilling. So for me, being a strengths-based performance coach is about helping someone realize their unique potential starting today, and helping them train both technically, what does it mean to practice in the simplest way that we can talk about practice, but also what are some psychological aspects what are some positive psychological aspects that can give one an advantage in that pursuit.
Wow, so that sounds like it's really individualized, and I'd love to get into kind of some takeaways that anyone can take away from, parallels you see in your really high-performing people that you've worked with. Are there any, across the board things that they all have in common, the highest performers that you see?
Well, look, whether we're talking about someone who is performing, who's a high performer who's also living a fulfilling life, or we're talking about a very high performer who's not living a fulfilling life, hard work is always there. There's, no matter how talented one thinks, I sort of use the air quotes with talented, or smart someone might be, in order to really get to the top of their game, it's about hard work. So that's always a consistent. And I'd say that there's a mode of kind of deliberate practice made popular by Malcolm Gladwell in Outliers, but really discovered or researched by Anders Ericsson of Florida State, that is a very specific way of practicing. It involves having a mentor and or a teacher. It involves having the proper equipment. It involves a certain kind of focus. It involves setting goals that are not just goals like in 5 years I want to be doing X, but in 30 minutes I want to be doing X. So, for example, if you're a runner, it's not about how fast you're going to run the next 10 miles. It's about where exactly are your knees as you're running, and what is your coach telling you need to be doing in real time. If you're a musician, it's not playing through a whole piece, it's just working on your trills. Let's say you're a pianist, trills, 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 trills. You're a flutist, long tone, long tone, long tone. And really being able to work on nothing but that. So when you walk away from your practice session, or at least that portion of your practice session, you can say, I have improved. It's constantly challenging oneself, which can be really hard because it's what I call forced evolution. You're pushing yourself further than you would be pushing yourself without that kind of focus. So incredibly intense, hard work with very specific goals and mentors around are consistent throughout. Now, when we start looking at people who split, right? Everyone's doing that, whether they are athletes, musicians, doctors, lawyers, podcast producers. Just as I'm sure you've looked around and seen other folks who the exemplars for you, who do great podcasts, who you really look up to, who do you look to emulate, so on and so forth. Once you get past those specifics, I think then we can really start talking about what differentiates the people who do that in a healthy way from people who do it in a less than healthy way. And it's not to say that you have to be healthy by any means to be successful. I mean, let's look at Steve Jobs, incredibly successful guy, the happiest guy in the world, not so much. Living a fulfilling life, questionable. Kanye, like textbook, right? So not necessarily, incredibly successful. Look, when you have your own line of shoes, you're successful. But is it the life that you'd wish for your kid? And that's how I often put it, because for many people it's not. No matter how successful, quote unquote, they are, it's not the life they want to live. But then you look at other folks, compare Steve Jobs to someone like Richard Branson, who puts family first. He puts positive emotions first. He puts meaning way up there. And you look at someone who's both successful and healthy. You look at Maya Angelou. We look at Ellen DeGeneres. Like these people who have integrated really healthy routine rituals and people, relationships into their life, and that's been essential for them. And you start to see a really sharp divide between the two. So everyone I've named worked incredibly hard, incredibly specifically for a long time, but not everyone there was healthy. And I think that's where it starts to get really interesting, at least for me.
Yeah. Have you read Elizabeth Gilbert's book, Big Magic?
Not yet.
It's a good one, and I think you'd like it. She talks a lot about creativity, and she talks about it reminds me of what you're talking about here, and how very highly creative people, especially in the past, there's that whole thing, I think it's when people are 28, like how Amy Winehouse and all these people happen to die at that specific age who were like super successful and creative. And sure. She talked about that, and she talked about, how basically exactly what you're saying about how there's a different way to do it. You don't have to be the starving artist and to feel sad to make good work. There are people who do that, and that's one way to do it, but you can also have tremendous success and be happy, which I think is what your work really explores. Yes, exactly. And I think that that I hesitate to say the myth, but the myth of the depressed artist is a really powerful one, and it deserves to be explored. It's when we see it, I always feel for those artists who think, well, clearly I need to be that way if I am going to be successful. And there are so many role models, as you pointed out. Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, all those people. Amy Winehouse, like you said. But look, and for certain people, to be clear, I can't sit here and say everybody can thrive in the same way. That would be unfair. And there are certainly people out there who, whether they're dealing with mental illness of some sort, even something like depression, that they're getting it out. They're communicating with the world through that art form. For them, that might have been right. Now, do they have to die at that age to get there? That's arguable. It's questionable. But there's certainly, I guess the way I'd put it is, that myth of the suffering, depressed, tragic artist is larger than reality itself.
Yes, there are exemplars out there of that, but there's so many people we don't talk about who are able to thrive on stage and off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you talked about some of those routines and rituals, and we talk a lot about routines and things that make you feel okay in the world and things that, help you to be at your best on this podcast. So I would love, some of the ones that you offer your class at NYU and the people that you work with as a coach. Or let's table that question, actually. Let's go back. Tell us, before you tell us what you say in this class, about this class and how it came to be. It's called The Science of Happiness.
Yes.
And I heard that it's the most popular elective class at NYU. So tell us a little bit about how that came to be and why you think it's so popular, first of all.
Well, it came to be because my co-instructor and I, who's also my co-author and one of my best friends, Alan Schlechter, he was teaching it a year before I got there. Alan's an adolescent psychiatrist who's one of the directors at adolescent psychiatry at Bellevue and here in New York. And Alan was teaching this course called The Science of Happiness. We were introduced by a very close friend. And what was supposed to be like a half-an-hour conversation turned into like a 3-hour conversation, at the end of which he said, "You should come in and catch the class." And I did. And I went in and I realized, Alan was teaching what he knew. Alan was teaching, most of what Alan was teaching was, these are the issues that are going to face you in college that are going to be obstacles to your happiness. Stress, anxiety, depression, all spot on. And this is how you deal with them. And then there was a little bit, say 10, 15% of it was, now, here are the opportunities in college. Positive emotions, relationships, meaning, purpose, achievement, choice, willpower, passion, all these things. And after the class, I went up, we were talking, and I said, "It's a great class, man. Honestly, I'm super biased, but I would change the ratio from 80-20 to at least closer to 50-50. That is to say, yes, every student's going to have obstacles, and we absolutely need to address them. Every person in the world has obstacles to thriving, and they need to be addressed. But it also has to be about the opportunities." So Alan was amazing, and he said, "Great, let's do it." And we basically tore up the syllabus and rewrote so much of it so that it really ended up now being about 70-30. 70% how to thrive, what the opportunities are to thriving, and 30% what are the barriers to thriving. It wouldn't be realistic if we didn't take those on. So that's how it came to be. Now, when I started teaching with Alan, we had, I want to say, almost had about 175 students, and now we have almost 500 students. I think that to address the second part of your question, I think it's this rise in popularity is for a number of reasons. It has always been really important. Well, let's start by saying the title, right? Who doesn't want to be happy? So when I tell people out there what I do, the course I teach, they can be literally, I'm talking to high school students or I'm talking to octogenarians, and every single one goes, "Oh man, I totally have to take that class, right? I really want to understand what happiness is too, and how to realize what happiness is." So I think a lot of students, well, why wouldn't you want to take that course? Alan and I have always put a huge emphasis on really relaying science, solid empirical science in a way that's super accessible and actionable. And I think that word of mouth got around really quickly. That is to say, when I got there, for example, he would have a slide that talked about optimism and how optimism affected people who had their second heart attack, whether they lived or, if they were pessimistic, the rate at which they died. There was a slide about the rates of divorce among people who were optimistic versus pessimistic. And if you say that to a classroom full of 18 to 23-year-olds, they'd glaze over. And why wouldn't they? Because no one's even close to having a heart attack.
Yeah.
And no one's been married. So you look at them and you go, wait, cut these slides. Let's talk about your GPAs. What happens when you're optimistic versus pessimistic? Let's talk about your social experiences. Let's talk about dating. Let's talk about what happens directly after college, your job interviews. And they're like, whoa, you're talking to me. So I think that's been tremendously helpful. There's a joke, it's sort of it's a joke in psychology, which is really look, every study that everyone does is about college sophomores because they're cheap and plentiful. So like, why do any of these studies have to do with anyone else? Well, that's an overstatement, but like, that's perfect for us because so many of our students we're all college students. So all of our studies are like, these are about you guys. This is about you and meaning and you and emotion and you and optimism and you and willpower. So we can look at them and go, this is all about you. And finally, most of our assignments are experiential. So instead of saying, go read these 10 books and these 10 research papers and write about it, which we, of course, do a couple times a semester, every week the assignment is go use your signature strengths in new ways for the next 5 days and write a 2-page paper about that. Go and keep a journal for the next week. Every night, write down 3 things that you're grateful for, and then write a 2-page paper about your experience so that the students can go through and really experience each of these empirically sound interventions and come back and go, either that was awesome, I totally had a great week and I want to do this forever, or say, this one kind of didn't work for me, which is absolutely fine because that's science. Not everything's going to work for everybody, but at least they get the chance to walk through them and figure out what's going to work for them. So by the end of the semester, they have something that they can do, that they will continue. And I can't tell you how often we get students coming back to us either after a semester or after 4 years or after longer and saying, I still do that thing from class and it's great. So I think those 3 things have really helped.
Oh, that's great. I love that that's available. I wish I would have had that in college.
You know what? Thank you for saying that, because what we always say is this is the course we wish we had in college. Mm-hmm. You know, and this is the book we wish we had in college. Like, and this is the other thing. Students today, like, I mean, I don't want to sound old, like kids these days, but the rates of depression and anxiety and stress and other issues are skyrocketing for college students and really for high school students too. So I think more than ever, they're like, wait, I'm in college and I'm really not enjoying it and I'm way too stressed out or I'm way too miserable. I need to figure something out here. And so I think that's the reason why they've reached out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What are maybe 1 or 2 tips or routines? You mentioned gratitude journaling. You mentioned a couple, but that you could give the people listening. We have college students and we have lots of people in their 20s like me and 30s and 40s. And, what are just a couple things, maybe other than gratitude journaling that you think help with the mindset of making someone a peak performer in whatever their field is?
Sure.
Or just being a person.
No, I think that's it. Being a peak person
exactly.
is a great start. It's a great start. Signature strengths are a terrific tool. I would recommend that signature strengths are kind of, they're pathways to how we can reach, how we can be engaged in what we're doing more often that are not necessarily topic specific. So what I'd say to listeners is go to the VIA website. It's Values in Action, so VIA website, and take the free assessment for the VIA Strengths test. There are 24 different strengths. They range from love to bravery to justice to appreciation of beauty and mastery to gratitude, humility, self-control. And what research has been showing is that consistently, overwhelmingly almost, people who use their signature strengths more often find themselves more engaged in the work that they do, and they find themselves with higher levels of positive emotion. So when you find that, let's say, a signature strength for you might be appreciation of beauty and mastery or excellence, looking for people who you really look up to consistently, watching movies that have exemplars of people who, let me back up. Let me say, go to a museum, spend time listening to music, go out and look at a sunset, watch a wonderful film. Do something in your life that allows you to really appreciate the beauty and mastery that, as a strength for you, is clearly something that helps you engage. If it's bravery, go out and do something that is pushing your boundary. If you're a student, ask that question in class that you're a little nervous to ask, because when you do, you'll find yourself more deeply engaged. You'll find yourself operating at a higher level. If you are, if it's not in the classroom, do it with some sort of political or social movement. Get out there and get involved, because that involves bravery. If it's justice, you can do the same thing. So when we figure out what our signature strengths are, it's a chance to really become engaged. I had a student who, a couple of years ago, took the assessment, and her boyfriend took the assessment. And she wanted to give him a really wonderful birthday present. So she did a strengths date where she found out that his number one strength was appreciation of beauty. And so she took him to a really wonderful breakfast at a lovely restaurant. They took a really nice walk through Central Park. They went to the Met Museum. They looked at art all day, and then they watched the sunset from the roof. He was like, this is the best date I've ever had. Her number one strength was love and capacity to be loved. And she had an amazing day too, because it was all about giving to him, loving him. So even if it's something like that, using your signature strengths in new ways and doing it consistently can be a wonderful way to elevate your level of engagement, positive emotions, and many, many other things as well. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. So it's is it similar to Myers-Briggs kind of? It's like a personality test situation, but it focuses on the positive aspects of you?
So, it's a great question. One of the reasons why we tend to go with something like VIA is because it has such strong empirical data, right? So Myers-Briggs is a private company. I know a lot of people really love that assessment, and it works beautifully for them. This is nice because it gives you more than 20 options of strengths. It has all that scientific data behind it. And yes, in many ways, it is about what are your personal values and strengths that help you to be your best. It's not about weaknesses. It's about strengths. So it's consistently about how do you operate at your very, very best.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I really, really love that. I think I can feel, speaking personally, very much like I'm not, and I've talked about this like a broken record on this podcast, but like I'm not the best at anything. Like I'm okay at a bunch of things, like a master of none. And I'm going to take this right after we hang up because I feel like it will, I think it's not productive for me to focus on the lack of, I'm not the best podcaster. I'm not the best at, maybe anything, but I'm doing okay, and I think it's easy to focus on comparison or focus on, the areas of lack, and that's just not productive. So I love this, and I'm excited that you've shared it.
Well, listen, playing off what you just shared, and thank you for sharing that, no one starts out as the best podcaster. No one in the world has ever started out as the best podcaster. No one in the world has ever started out as the best anything. But one might argue that by leaning on your strengths, let's say your strength is curiosity. By appreciating your strength of curiosity and knowing, wait, I'm still learning about, I'm on a constant quest to be the best podcaster I can be. But I love the fact that I can ask these questions of people, that I can understand people, right? Maybe if one of your strengths is social justice, right? Then you get the opportunity to share insights from other people with the rest of the world that can change the world in a certain way. So I think appreciating the strength that you'll find in your assessment will say, I lead through curiosity, I lead through justice, I lead through love of learning, so on and so forth. And you can appreciate that whether you're podcasting or whether you're walking down the street.
Yeah.
And that's an incredibly powerful thing. For the other folks out there, I'll tell you a quick story, if I may.
Yeah, of course, please.
Which is, I had a client I was working with who was a lawyer, very successful, general counsel of a very successful company, and he came to me right after he quit, and he said, I can't do it anymore. Like I need to figure out what I'm going to do, but it can't be that. And the process that we went through was, we talked about what your floor of your salary was. We talked about cities that he could live in, so we sort of got the basic parameters. And we absolutely talked about his skills. But then we talked about his strengths. His strengths were wisdom, humor, love of learning, teamwork. And every interview he went on, every conversation he had, every time he had drinks, every time he had a meal, every time he had anything, he would go back to his little moleskin and rate everything, including his strengths. So he got 6 interviews into a huge company to be their general counsel. The money was through the roof. And, you know, it was an amazing opportunity. But he was like, I'm 6 interviews in. No one's cracked a smile. So there goes humor out the door. You know, it's like they want me to oversee like 300 lawyers, but that doesn't help me learn anything new. Like, I'd rather learn how to, you know, make pants or brew beer, like anything else. And so he and it didn't work. So he kept rating all these companies, and in the end, he had 2 job offers. One was from what would have been a dream job for him 5 years ago, and the other was from a startup. He was like, they barely hit the floor of my salary, but man, they are funny. It's a super small company, so they want me to wear all these different hats. Meaning his level of learning was through the roof, and they were always asking him for his thoughts on things. Thus, his wisdom was playing in. And his teamwork, because they were a small organization, they really wanted everyone to work together, was again like fantastic. So he ended up going with the startup instead of the big company because the strengths were too high for him. And we kept meeting less often. We kept meeting, and every time he'd say, you know, every morning I get up and I can't wait to go to work. I look forward to working with the folks. I look forward to learning new things. I look forward to weighing in on things, all the things that were his strengths. And the company grew from when he joined 10 people to over 1,000 people. And he called me about it 9 months ago, and he said, "Hey, have you seen the business page today?" And I said, "I haven't." So you should look. And it was his company, which was Jet.com, had been bought out by Walmart for $3.5 billion. And we had dinner the next week. And it was interesting because he said, you know, all the phone calls I've gotten, all the congratulations I've gotten, the emails, so on and so forth, the consistent questions have been, A, when are you going to retire? And B, what island are you going to buy? And he looked at me and he said, you know what, man, this job has been so wonderful that it wasn't ever about the money. And I'm not buying an island, I'm not retiring. I'm just stoked that I know we're going to be in business for a lot longer because I can keep working with these people, doing great things, doing great work, in an environment that's really awesome. You know, that's what it is about strengths, is they allow us to be engaged and look forward to our work every day, whether we are podcasting, brewing, making pants, you know, or flipping burgers. I think that's one of the beautiful things about them. Yeah. So, you know, so your podcasting career enhanced by strengths, it's already going well. It'll only theoretically be that much better.
Well, thank you, Dan, first of all.
Well, my pleasure.
Yeah, I wish I knew my strengths so I could tell you them right now, but
we can have that conversation later.
Yeah,
maybe it's part 2, or maybe it's just you and me over coffee.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I want to talk a little bit more about positive psychology and how it works. I think people like myself understand that thinking positively is productive and important and just feels better, but I would love to know more of the science behind it and why, and, you know, maybe just start by defining positive psychology and how we can use it in our lives.
Sure. So let's go back. Let's go back to the beginning of psychology. Let me give you the quick primer.
Okay.
Earliest department of psychology worldwide, one of the earliest was Harvard University. And if you look back in the 1870s, 1880s, the things they were studying at Harvard University back then, and really all the way through the 1940s, were the functioning of the human mind. Now, that could be the functioning of the human mind when it was dealing with illness or anxiety or stress or depression, or basically anything that would take you below, let's say, 0, right? Below that set point. But psychology was also looking at people who thrived. What made up a good marriage? What about human beings who were achieving on a particularly high level? What about parents who were doing really well, or kids who were doing really well? They were looking at people who were succeeding in school, right? So until the 1940s, psychology was really what's going on in your mind when you are suffering, but also what's going on in your mind when you're thriving. And in the 40s, World War II came, and we had this huge wave of soldiers dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder and their families. as a result, dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. And 90+% of the funding shifts, understandably, to how do we help people who are suffering, because so many people are. And that really was what psychology became from the 1940s through the 1990s. And we got to know what those things were, what those issues and challenges were really, really well, which is important. But we forgot what it meant to thrive. We forgot what it meant to understand how people live fulfilling lives, how they find well-being. And as an example, between 1960 and 1999, I believe, the ratio of negatively oriented studies in psychology to positively was about 21-1. So like 45,000 studies on depression, about 400 studies on joy, right? So 1999, Martin Seligman comes along. He becomes president of the American Psychological Association. Here's this man who really made his name on studying depression, and he had turned it around. And he thought, wait a second, if people can learn to be depressed, which is what he uncovered, and he does so much research on, then why can't they learn to be hopeful? Why can't they learn to be happy? And he had turned that research around, and upon becoming president of the APA, said, look, and I quote, psychology is half-baked. We have baked the part about illness. We have baked the part about suffering, but we haven't baked the part about what makes life worth living. And so what he really did was bring together these disparate researchers who were in very prestigious places around the country. Folks like Barbara Fredrickson, who was then at University of North Carolina studying positive emotions, and Chris Peterson, who was studying character strengths and relationships at the University of Michigan, Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, who wrote the book Flow, who was at the University of Chicago at the time. He was studying engagement and flow phenomenon, and he said, let's start studying these for real, and let's give it the same kind of empirical scientific rigor that we have with all of the other psychological challenges and issues that we have for so long. So, you're absolutely right when you say we know that when I say we, I say you and me and everyone else who's listening knows they'd rather be happy than sad. We know that when we think positively, there's something that's happening. When we're optimistic, there's something different. But what positive psychology did was to really take those things, those ideas, which are as old as we can go back to Aristotle and Plato and Confucius. They knew it too. But what positive psychology does is it takes it and puts it under the empirical lens of science and says, okay, when does a smile help? When does a smile not help? Can you fake it until you make it? What happens with relationships? What happens when you spend time with someone who has more willpower? What does willpower do? How does willpower work? How does choice work? How does it affect our day-to-day lives? What is meaning? How can we get more of it? What are ways that we can recommend, that we can suggest to people that will lead them toward more engagement? And rather than just knowing that it works some of the time, getting a sense of when it works and for whom it works and for whom it doesn't work. You tell someone who's having a perfectly okay day, to smile. There's a big difference between that and someone who's truly depressed, and the effect that it has on them. Because someone who's really dealing with mental illness, like depression, it actually will put them in a worse place. So getting a sense of what works, when it works, under a real empirical lens, that's what positive psychology is. And to be honest with you, Katie, at the end of the day, we don't want there to be a positive psychology. I say we as in the community. For many of us in the community, we just want it to be psychology.
Yeah.
But we want it to be psychology that looks at both illness and thriving. And hopefully, I think we're on our way there. But for right now, because it is a renewed look at this in science, it has that name.
That's fascinating. So how can it be applied on a practical level in people's lives, or in my life listening? Like what is something to kind of be aware of? Is it managing your thoughts and orienting them towards the positive as much as you can, or like what is it day-to-day life?
So, and this goes back to the idea of how unique everyone is, right? I mean, if we say it's going to be positive as often as we can, well, there are times when being positive isn't necessarily the best thing. So how do you manage for that? I mean, you're asking a great question. I think, there are a number of ways that I'd start off with that are super accessible. And that would begin with relationships. In college, the trends we've seen over the past 40 years is that depression and stress are up. But guess what else is down? It's the amount of time that people spend with their friends. And if you look at the two directions, they almost mirror each other. That is to say, a lot of students out there, and I would say a lot of listeners out there, 20-somethings and 30-somethings and 40-somethings, the first thing that we do when we get stressed out at work or at school or at home is we run off to be by ourselves, right? So my students will say, when I get stressed out, I run to the library, or I hide underneath the covers with like a pint of Ben & Jerry's and I don't talk to anybody. And what we will say in our class is that running away from friends during times of stress is like driving away from the hospital when your appendix is about to burst. Right? What you need more than anything is to go and talk to those friends that you have and say, hey, I'm having a rough day. Even if it's just, I bombed a test, or I'm having a rough day at work, or reaching out to a friend saying, my partner and I we're having some issues. Many people will hide from that. But when we turn to friends, it's far more helpful than we understand. It decreases our stress. It allows us to begin talking about those challenges and not let them boil up. It has so many different knock-on effects that are profoundly important, that cultivating relationships in our life might be the number one thing that I would say. Make time for those relationships. Even though you're telling yourself, I don't have any time, I'm too busy at work, I'm too busy doing this, too busy doing that, making time for relationships is absolutely key, right? Even if you put it in your schedule to say, you know what, I'm putting 2 coffees a week in my schedule with a buddy, or I'm going to make these phone calls at these times, or I'm going to send out 3 emails every morning to friends saying, hey, I've just been thinking about you, hope everything's going well. Just maintain those relationships seems to be increasingly challenging, but is more essential than ever.
Yeah,
right?
That's really, really great advice. It's like the thing you said about, it's the last thing that we want to do, but it's the thing that we need to do. I completely relate to, and I've seen that in my life. Like when I'm feeling sad or like feel melancholy in some way, I want to be alone and disengage. But when I, as someone who is extroverted and introverted, and we all get our energy a little bit of both, I think the times when I do put myself around people when I don't feel like it, I'm never sad that I did. I'm always happy that I did.
There you go.
A better place.
It's such an interesting thing, right? But yet we all forget.
Right.
We get to that place where we're like, no, they wouldn't want to talk to me. They're just I'm going to bum them out, or I'm going to bring them down, and they're not going to hang out with me again. And that is never the case. They love you. They care for you.
Well, people like seeing each other's vulnerability, I think, and
yeah,
that's really cool.
It certainly brings them closer, and think about and also think about what you're getting, what you're experiencing in those relationships when they're good, right? I mean, when you have good news, what's the first thing you want to do?
Right. You want to be around people, call people.
Exactly. You want to share it with them. So, in some studies, we found that when people share good news with friends, when those friends respond in active and constructive ways. So let's say, Katie, that you shared a piece of really good news. What's something that's happened to you recently that you're really happy about or proud of that you'd share?
Oh, this is nice. I'm moving to New York in June.
You are?
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Wait, so how did that come about?
I made a choice, and I'm putting it in motion. I've never lived out of the Midwest, and it's happening. And I'm nervous, but yeah.
That is wonderful. Wait, so
Thank you.
When the moment you decided, can you just tell me about that, when you sort of realized this is going to happen?
Oh, yeah. I I think I sent a mass text to all of my friends in New York, and I was like, it's actually happening. It's approved. I'm coming. Help me find an apartment.
Nice. And how did that feel when you hit send?
Amazing. So many party emojis.
There you go, right?
Yeah.
See, this is it. So we have actually, that's called active constructive responding. When you share good news with me, if I ask you a question or two about what it felt like for you and tell me more about it, it's like you're reliving it.
Yeah.
So you get the benefits of reliving something wonderful again. And some studies will show that part of sharing it with someone when they respond to you that way is even more wonderful than the actual event itself.
Oh my gosh,
Right?
totally. And
Right?
this is an interesting conversation to loop this into social media, because as soon as you were talking about that, when you said you get to relive it again, when something good happens to me, or something that feels good or interesting, I love to call my mom and tell her, and I didn't really even know why, because a lot of times her reaction isn't even, the thing that I'm excited about. She has no, she doesn't really, she's not as into podcasts as I am, or she's not as into my
Right.
friends as I am, or the weird, apartment thing. But I understand it's not about her, it's about me, and it's about what I get to relive it. And I think it's the same thing for social media. I like to share my life and take photos and share them on social media because, and I'm sure this is there's a lot of layers to this, but one is I get to relive it again, and I get to involve more people into it. If I had got a great haircut and that was a really fun thing, if I take a photo of it and post it like I did yesterday, then I get to talk to other people about it and relive that fun experience that I had at the salon again, which is the silliest example, or a vacation or whatever.
Well, see, that's what I think. That's a great example, because you're using an example that doesn't have to be I'm moving to New York. It's I got a great haircut yesterday, and not everyone moves to New York every day,
Right.
but people get haircuts on a regular basis, or something cool happens to them on a regular basis. Like I saw something really neat in the street today. I saw someone really kind do something to somebody else, or I had a great conversation, and just sharing that can be incredibly impactful. You also bring up a really interesting point in that it's social media versus live. And this is, I'll loop positive psychology back in to say, one of the things we're studying right now is, I have colleagues who are studying, so what's the difference? Is there a difference between sharing good news on Facebook or Instagram or any social media versus sharing good news in person? There absolutely is, but we don't know exactly what it is yet. We're still studying it. So that can be interesting. So so in a way, you want to say, Katie, something really awesome just happened to you. Absolutely share it on social media. But we also might find that you should call someone too, or you should go see a friend, because we know when you see someone eye to eye and you share good news, something even more deep happens in that engagement. So we don't know yet. We're looking at that, but we do know, exactly as you've experienced, that even sharing something as seemingly routine as I got a great haircut can really elevate our day far more than we give it credit for being able to.
Right. Yeah, and another thing I thought about when you talked about social media is my experience is I'm on Instagram and Snapchat way more when I'm lonely and I'm having a shitty day than when I'm having a great day and I'm around people and I'm feeling amazing. The story would be better that day because it's more interesting and I'm doing more things, but it's the last thing I want to do. But when I'm lonely or sad, I'm, if I'm Instagramming a lot, everyone come over and check on me, because that means I'm probably sad.
Right. Oh, see, there you go. And that I think comes back to your question about the science of, because everyone's going to be different. As you mentioned the extrovert introvert thing. For an introvert, that might be a great day to say, you know what, I'm reaching out in the way that I reach out. For an extrovert like yourself, that might be a sign that they're not really operating the best possible place. Because for you, you're going to be talking to people, you're going to be around people, and that's what we've seen from the introvert studies on introverts, is that they often prefer to write. They often prefer to post images. And so you're absolutely right. For you, when you're thriving versus when you might be struggling a bit.
Yeah. I don't know, though. I don't know. I think I'm right on the cusp, because I need to be around people, but I am a writer, and I think I'm must be right in the middle, but this part's getting self-serving. I want to know more about your thoughts on social media when it comes to positive psychology, or just your thoughts on social media in general.
It's a great question, and I hesitate only because the research is still in play. There's some research coming out that's really interesting. There's a book actually by super book that just came out called Irresistible by Adam Alter at NYU, who really talks about technology and addiction in a way.
I just heard him on Fresh Air. It was great.
Yeah, brilliant guy, really good writer, and so those are the things we're starting to see come out that are telling us, informing us about what social media can do. What is her name? Turkle, I believe is her name, at MIT, has been studying this for a while. And so let me give you an example. And this is more technology than social media, but Sherry Turkle, that's right, at MIT. If you are sitting with your family at the table having dinner, the conversation that you have is when your phone is somewhere in sight, on the table, on the kitchen counter, anywhere in sight, is different than if your phone is out of sight. Because when the phone is in sight, the conversation tends to be a bit shallower, a bit simpler. And it's really interesting to know that just having that present can make such a big difference. Think about a date. If you're on a date, your phone's out, the conversation is going to be different than if your phone's in your purse or in your pocket, because it's always there. It's a temptation to either Google something, or the phone call you get, or the text you get, or something else. So, I guess I think about social media, and this is not rooted in any kind of science. I think about social media this way. We have spent tens of thousands of years communicating in one way only, and that was face-to-face. And only in the past, couple thousands of years have we started to send written letters. But not until the last, and 100 years ago, 150 years ago, we got on the phone. But still, most of our communication until 20 years ago when cell phones really got big was face-to-face. And at least we could hear the voice. All of a sudden, there's no voice and there's no face. And so we have not evolved to be able to really have that depth of engagement the same way. So I think social media is great in many, 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 many ways. It allows us to do what we're doing right now. It allows us to share information that's everyday information that says, hey, I was hanging out with my friends, or hey, I got a great haircut. And this is not scientifically based, but I think there's a line where it starts to be more of a barrier than an opportunity. When we start to share things that that would be so wonderful to share in person, or to share on, with hearing someone else's voice, we start sharing it out in a different way. Are we losing terrific opportunity to nurture our well-being? There's a funny little clip, Aziz Ansari talking about texting. He's on a date. He meets a girl and they're texting, and he's like, everyone texts. Like, if the phone rings, he says, why are you calling me? Just text me. It's like gotten to the point where people don't call each other very much anymore. So I think, we're missing some of these opportunities to connect, which are incredibly important. So my thought, as long as we use social media in a way that is beneficial for us, that is not the only way that we communicate, wonderful. It's the challenges that it brings when we start to use it too much, and in ways that isn't so wonderful.
Yeah, it's kind of like moderation in all things.
It is, absolutely, no question. But I'd also add that the addictive qualities of technology,
right,
as I think as Adam Alter talks about, are far greater than we realize.
Yeah.
It's like the missing limb syndrome. And how many times do any of us check our phone every day? There's an app called Moment. It tracks how long you spent on your phone, how many times you picked it up. If you've ever left your phone at home, how often have you reached for it in your pocket anyway? Right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no,
so,
we're all addicts. It's crazy. And that I will put the link to his book, because that episode of Fresh Air with Terry Gross, when he was on, I've been telling everyone about, because it was really eye-opening.
Yeah.
I want to get back to positive psychology briefly and talk about
Sure.
negative self-talk. It's something that, I think about a lot, and I'm so aware that our thoughts become things, and our thoughts are so powerful, and the way that we feel, and then therefore the actions that we take, and then therefore our lives. But I still have this innate sense, that I'm not good enough, or I'm not smart enough, or I'm not pretty enough, or I'm not whatever enough, that's just there. But I know it's so negative and not productive. Can you talk about that from a psychological perspective, and then how to shift out of that?
Sure. So, what a lot of us get caught up in, let me say a lot of us, every single one of us, one could argue, has something called a thinking trap. And that thinking trap could be something like, I'm not good enough. That thinking trap could be something like, when someone does something that's not necessarily that's negative, you assume that it's your fault, right? Personalizing. It could be catastrophizing, like when we believe the only possible outcome is the worst thing imaginable, right? Mind reading. We think that we know what other people are thinking, and we assume that it's the worst thing. So as I go through these, my bet is that everyone out there who's listening is going to relate to one or two or five of them, right? How often you think the trap would be jumping to conclusions, right? So it's a broad conclusion based on one single event or an inconclusive piece of evidence, like I'm not good enough. Why? Because the podcast that I did last week wasn't so great. Wait, that's one podcast. Hold on one second. So how do we argue against them? So I'd say when it comes to these thinking traps, the first step is to identify them and know which ones you tend to go to. We all tend to go, well, take that back. If you're listening, which of them do you tend to go to as an individual? Are you personalizing? Are you catastrophizing? Is it all or nothing, black or white thinking? And once you can identify it, you're far more likely to spot it. So for you, what was the example you used before? I'm not good enough? I'm not smart enough?
Yeah, just a general, I go through phases of feeling like I'm not I can just umbrella say not enough in all of those areas, or get specific.
Right. Yeah. Right. So part of what you can do is ask yourself a question, right? Something like, if it's perfect, right? If using a word like perfect or failure or all or nothing, right? So ask, how can I look at this from a pro-con perspective? Like, what are the things that I think I might not be good at? But really, what are the things that I know I am good at? When in the past have I been successful at this? When have I known that I've done a good job in this? And start to look for those times in our life when we have been successful in that capacity. One of the things that is essential to athletes who are consistently successful is it's a little sort of saying, which is you have a short memory for losses and you have a long memory for victories. Right? That is to say, if someone a baseball player strikes out of the plate, if they dwell on that, then the odds of them striking out again are better than they would if they leave it behind them and they think about, okay, that's done. Let me think about the time when I got a good hit. Let me think about a time when I was feeling strong. What happened then? Because once you start to think through those, it's not just positive thinking, just thinking I can. It's thinking realistically. Wait a second. I've hit a home run off this guy before. Wait a second. I have made these plays before. So when we get down on ourselves, it's often our thinking about something that didn't go well and overgeneralizing it, right? So what we need to do, or what can be beneficial, is think about when times did go well.
Yeah.
When did we feel strong? When did we feel smart? When were we successful? And not just thinking I can be, but what did I do? What was I doing when that went well? Wait, maybe if you're a student in the classroom, maybe I studied more for that test last time. Maybe I studied with other people last time. Maybe it was a course that I was really interested in. So it's a sign that I should really be taking courses that I find super engaging instead of taking those courses that I'm really not that interested in. Maybe it's a sign for me. And in the case that you brought up is let me think about those times when I felt really good.
Yeah.
What specifically was happening, and how can I emulate that behavior again? Did I
Yeah.
prep more for the podcast? Was it, maybe maybe it's not you, Katie. Maybe it's your guest. Maybe you just happened to find a guest you didn't jibe with. Nothing against your guest, but maybe it's just someone who just didn't quite fit your style. You know what? That happens. No one bats 1,000.
Right.
Right. So figuring out alternate ideas based on reality can get you back into the swing.
Yeah. What about dealing with negative people, or people who, maybe aren't aware or awake to these concepts, haven't taken your class, and don't realize the impacts of their negativity? How can someone who, like me and you, and hopefully now all the people listening, are aware of positive psychology, how can we deal with them and have relationships with them without, trying to change them, but also protecting ourselves and our beliefs?
That is a great question. And it's a really challenging one to answer in a general way, because they're going to range from people who have occasional bouts of negative thinking to people who are dealing with real issues that could be mental illness related or are not, but are really just bringing us down. And that's why I hesitate to answer, because in some cases you can potentially help them by asking questions that might bring the possibilities rather than the impossibilities to light. Tell me about a time when that did work for you. Tell me about a time when you were successful in that regard. Tell me about a time when you were feeling strong, and you might be able to help them, just not change them, but just see that there are things that they can dwell on that are actually quite positive.
Yeah.
But in other cases, there are going to be relationships where they might just not be right for you, at least not right now. And these are people who, depending on the relationship, you can sit with them and say, hey, it seems like things have been really challenging recently, and maybe you want to talk them through it. Maybe you want to suggest that they, if it's deeper than that maybe they need professional help. So as a friend, you want to take as many steps as you can to help them and to be with them. And maybe it's a challenging time in life, and even to get them help if that's what they need. And sometimes that's the case before you cut them out of your life completely. And look, and there are certainly some relationships where it's just not, every relationship has a shelf life.
Yeah.
Right? Whether it's romantic or otherwise. Some are an engagement at a coffee shop. Some are the rest of your life. And they go through phases and issues and challenges and wonderful times and hard times.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to answer that one, but there's certainly ways to try to nudge them towards thinking about what might be going well.
What if the negativity is specific towards you? Like, they have fear and they're taking their life experience and trying to, reflecting that back at you and being met with that negativity for your life experience. That might be different from theirs, of just people not understanding each other. And I think there's so much of that in our current climate that we're in right now.
Right.
How do you have any, feedback or advice there?
Can you be more specific about the situation?
Yeah, like if you have something that you're doing that the person that you're talking to about doesn't agree or doesn't relate to, and you feel strong in your choice, and you want to be able to still have them in your life and communicate with them with love, but you're being met with negativity because there's just not an understanding there. There's a lack of understanding,
Right.
Whether it's with politics or whether it's with a life choice, when it's just two, really conflicting viewpoints, but, one is really coming from a negative fear place.
Yeah. Again, that's such a tricky one to answer, based on because every situation is so unique.
Yeah.
And, if you're talking about a life choice, one would hope that for the most part, those people that are close to us are supportive of choices that we believe to be healthy.
Yeah.
Then again, there are parents who have experience in life that might cause them to think one way versus another. There are colleagues or friends that have these perspectives in life that are really challenging to challenge, right? So for those people, it's a tough one to answer, again, because I think there's so many factors involved that, there are people who are going to be challenged. You're going to have difficult times. I would just say that it all really boils down to communication.
Yeah.
The more you can communicate, the better. And once you shut down communication, there's a phrase, we agree to disagree.
Yep.
Which I have a real problem with, because it so often means that we're just not willing to have this conversation. And so if we're talking about something here that is that big in our lives, then we're talking about having to push through really challenging conversations. I think when one person's not willing to have that conversation, we're looking at a dead end. And that can be either side. That can be someone who says, no, this is my life choice and you have to accept it. Or, you're bringing me down with, the fact that you don't accept me. Well, that's not necessarily productive either. Both sides have to be willing to have the conversation, to really understand the other. When we respect the other person, if that relationship is important enough that we have those conversations, then we have to keep pushing through. I can't advocate for cutting off friendship or ending communication, because it would be unfair, given that I don't know the situation specifically.
Right.
That's why I'd go back to communication being so key. And look, there are tools for communication. There are tools where we can. In the book, we write about something called PrEP, which is tools that we recommend for people who are having really challenging relationships, to be able to say, I feel like you're invalidating me. To be able to say, I think that I feel like you're not listening, that you're going to anger really quickly, that you're, so on and so forth. So I think there are tools that we can use that help deal with those barriers to communication that can be really helpful.
Yeah. Oh, I love those. I love communication tips.
Yeah. PrEP is an interesting one. It's the most evidence-based process that we have when it comes to being able to help people with their issues.
Yeah.
Right. So, just knowing,
is that an acronym?
PrEP is, it is, and I can't recall what it stands for.
It's okay. It's just a Google away. We've all got phones.
Exactly. You know what? I'm sorry. It is Prevention and Relationship Enhancement Program.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And the yellow flags, one is escalation, one is invalidation. So escalation would be something like, look, you promised me that you were going to clean up the dishes today. Well, what's your problem? Why don't you chill out? Why, maybe I need a day off. Well, why are you yelling at me now? Now you're yelling at me.
Right.
And we go up and up and up. So how can we resolve that? Another one would be invalidation, right? That's to say, just to say something like, that's stupid. Well, all of a sudden, that stupid means you're stupid, or I feel stupid, or it's an eye roll, or that's so obvious, which means the same thing as you're stupid. But when we start doing that, people don't, all of a sudden, that's basically going to shut down a conversation. So, can we please have a conversation where let's just start our sentences with the word I instead of the word you.
Yeah.
Right. So instead of saying you always do this, well, that's over. But instead saying, I really feel like this, and so you're not accusing, right? Another one's withdrawal, for example, right? Just stop talking about it. That's a challenging one, which means you're never going to get anywhere. So just knowing that there are these tools that we can use to say, hey, this is, I feel like we're dealing with withdrawal here, and it's important that we talk about this, is that first step. So when we're talking about challenging relationships, there are certainly tools that we can use that can help us sometimes get through the barriers. You know what? Not always.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not going to work. Sometimes we just have to try our very best, and sometimes realize maybe it's not the right time for it, and hopefully we can pick it up at another time. But I think as long as we feel like we've done our best, and we've really tried our best to try all different angles, and question even our own selves to say, how else can I be involved in this conversation in a way that might allow for better communication? I think those are the essentials.
Yeah. Oh, that's really helpful. Okay, one last thing before I ask you the questions I ask everyone.
Please, go ahead.
I'd love to hear you talk about deliberate practice versus flow and just touch on that. I've heard you talk about it before, and I thought it was really fascinating.
Sure. So deliberate practice, as we mentioned before, is very specific goals, mentors, teachers, the right kind of instruction, and really the right level of challenge. So you're pushing yourself so hard that the way I put it, it's like if you're walking up a hill with a bag of boulders, and you're making it up that hill, you want to put another boulder in there. So you're just making it up that hill. It's forced evolution, right? According to Anders Ericsson, who is the man behind deliberate practice and flow cannot coexist. Flow is when we lose ourselves. We lose track of time. We lose track of many things. We don't hear the phone ring. We don't hear the text go off because we're so deeply engaged in whatever it is we're doing. Podcasts, listening to music, climbing a mountain, reading a book. The issue there is that in deliberate practice, we never go into flow by definition. Because if we go into flow, we're not focused on our goals enough. We're not pushing ourselves hard enough. We have to be constantly aware in deliberate practice of what we're doing. Otherwise, we're not going to be pushing ourselves to the level where we get that much better at it. Right? So basically, there's no room for flow in deliberate practice. Now, that said, we're talking about very, very specific scientific definitions. So, for example, is it possible to engage in deliberate practice? Well, how do I do this? Is it possible to improve at a very steady rate if we don't have immediate feedback that's demanded in deliberate practice? Yeah, sure it is. We might not be improving as quickly, but we're still improving. So in a way, it's a bit of a compromise. But the idea is ultimately for deliberate practice, which is the theoretically most intense form of improvement, we can't be in flow.
Oh, that's really fascinating.
Yeah. All right.
So something that I ask everyone that comes on the show is, what are your personal morning routines and evening routines and things that you do every day to start your day and relax at the end of a long day?
Let's see. That's a great question. So every day I start my day by drinking, let's go anywhere, couldn't it? By drinking 32 ounces of water. First thing I do.
Nice. Giving your insides a bath.
Exactly. Hydrating, getting ready for the day, the whole thing. Giving my insides a bath, like prepping. What I have done, not as consistently as I would like, but definitely more consistently, is I wake up before anyone else here wakes up and I meditate. I'd like to do it every day. I don't get it that consistently, but when I do, it is wonderful. And then the third thing I do is always sit down with my son and make sure that we hang out during breakfast. And that is a very, very special time for me, even if it's 10 minutes. The end of the day to relax, I try to get in a workout in as often as possible, and that's pretty consistently. Even if it means stopping in the gym and doing something for 30 to 40 minutes, I'll get that in. That's essential for me being even close to sane on a consistent basis. So exercise is really big for me. And then the last thing I do before I go to sleep every single night is I go into my son's room and I give him a kiss on the forehead. while he's sleeping. He's 9, and I tell him that I love him more than anything in the world. So that is, those are my daily routines.
I love that.
I will add one other thing, which is,
Yeah.
on my best days, I absolutely speak to friends. So I try to get on the phone, have a conversation with somebody every day.
Cool.
But I would say that most consistently is that end of the day. I've done it every single day since he was born for 9 years. And I promise myself I will do it every single day until he leaves the house, which I might not let him do for many, many years. So, yeah.
What is your advice for moving to New York City, and why did you want to move there right after high school or college, like you mentioned earlier?
I knew that I wanted to go into the music business, and it was either here in classical music, it's either here or London, period. And I had a great job offer from an amazing woman who I worked with my entire career as an agent. And she was extraordinary. She had been in the business 25 years. She was a remarkable mentor. I could not have asked for a more wise, caring, driven, in a good way, person. So I was lucky to come here. And I got an offer to work in London about 2 years later. And I said no, because I knew my parents were far more important to me. And they lived in Pittsburgh, so I could still drive back on occasion. So that worked. My grandparents are here in New York as well, but originally I knew I was meant to be in the music business, and there was no question, never even an iota that I would move here, and that's what I would get into.
What's your favorite part of living in New York City?
Oh boy, that's a great question. Are we talking podcast, or are we talking about me and you here?
Both. I think it's both.
Because I could get super detailed if it was like, you got to go eat here, you got to try this.
Oh yeah, well we can do that too, but we can do that after. Whatever.
All right, perfect. So, New York is like a drug, in a wonderful way, often, in that the speed and the pace and the level that people work at is mind-blowing. When I go to the opera, and I go as often as I can, it's like, it's one of the greatest opera houses in the world. When I go to the museum, when I go as often as I can, it's one of the great museums in the world. And by the way, if it's not the Met, or if it's not MoMA, or if it's not one of the other, well-known, it's a smaller museum, which is still amazing. If I go to a theater, if I go to restaurants, if you go anywhere, things move super quickly, but like the levels are super, super high. So you get attuned to this flow, to this pace, to this rhythm. And, once you leave, it can be great to get a rest, but then you kind of jones for it. And you want to come back, and you want to eat the food, and you want to hear the music, and you want to be around the people, and you want to have the level of conversation. And that those things are really extraordinary. And look, and there are so many people here. There's not a day that goes by that if you want to meet someone who is unique and fascinating, providing that you are open to the variety of folks who are here, you can meet unique and fascinating every block you walk down, and that's really incredible.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I like how you articulated all that.
Oh, thank you.
All right, so these ones
you
are
have a lot to look forward to, Katie.
Thank you.
A lot.
I know. I'm really excited.
And we get you here soon too. See, that's the other thing. People come to New York and we're like, oh my gosh, we have a whole new influx of like super cool, fascinating people.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm excited. All right, these ones are a little bit quicker. So just say kind of the first thing that comes to your mind. Favorite color?
Blue.
Favorite day of the week?
Friday.
One thing that you wish more people knew about positive psychology, or psychology in general?
That there are... Positive psychology shows us that we have a choice. A choice to be happy, a choice to have meaning, a choice to live a fulfilling life. And that there are actions that we can take to change the way our lives are and to really thrive.
Cool. What's one thing you wish people knew about you?
Gosh. I have such a huge array of interests. Maybe it's that I find everyone that I meet fascinating in some way. I find people fascinating, whether they are superstars or they are just walking down the street and doing their own thing. I don't know. I find them really intriguing. I find human beings really intriguing. You know.
Yeah.
I think my friends
Me
would
too.
probably say that that Dan Lerner is the only guy who loves football and opera with equal passion, and that's probably true.
That's great.
But yeah, I think I'm just fascinated by human beings
Yeah.
in a really loving way. Like I just, yeah, I guess I'd go there.
Yeah. Cool. What's your greatest lesson on relationships?
The greatest lesson I've learned.
Yeah, or anything you want. Yeah, you've learned or that has helped you.
There's so many lessons. That's a tricky one. I guess I'd say that relationships are the most important thing in our lives. My parents were the most important thing in my life, and my son is now the most important thing in my life, and his mother and my friends and my colleagues, and they make our world what it is. The people we surround ourselves with are really so much of who we end up being, and people forget that too often.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Where are you with spirituality and God, and what do you think happens when we die?
You're asking some big questions.
Yeah. It's like the biggest question.
That is kind of the biggest question. I think that when we die, how do I put this? I don't know what happens when we die, but I don't believe in any of the things that we traditionally tend to think of in Western cultures.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I did. I really wish that I could say I believe that I would see my mother and father again, that I would see my grandparents again, that I would see my dog again. I really hope that's the case. I think that we're just really this incredible confluence of events have allowed us to live for however many years we live on this earth, and I don't know what happens afterwards, but I don't think about it very much. I tend to think more about what I can do while I'm here, who I can do it with while I'm here, and the good I can bring, and the fun I can have, and the relationships I can nurture while I'm here.
Yeah.
What happens afterwards? That remains to be seen.
Yeah. Well, speaking of being here and in a body, what is the best thing you've eaten in the last week?
Ooh. The best thing I've eaten in the last week was this insane dessert. There's a restaurant called Empillon, Empillion. There are a couple of them here in New York, and a buddy of mine just opened. He's one of the owners. He opened the newest one in Midtown, and the chef is amazing. And they do this. It looks exactly like a half an avocado,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not. I don't know what it is, but it's like one of the greatest desserts I've ever had in my entire life.
Wow.
It's like I just kept eating it, going, what the? I can't actually on this podcast use the words I was using, but and just kept going. And finally, David came over and he said, "How you guys like the meal?" And I'm like, "Dude, what is this? It's insane." He goes, "Yeah, it's." He wouldn't tell me.
Oh no, I really want to know.
Well, you're moving to New York. Go to Empillon on, I think it's 52nd Street or 53rd Street. It opened last Thursday.
Huh.
And get that avocado dessert because it's insane.
Wow.
I'm
Is
not
there
even
like
a big
pit?
dessert guy.
Is there like a something?
No, it's not even. I don't think there's any. I don't even know there's avocado in it. It looks like there's half an avocado. It sits on this what looks like snow, but it's lime ice shavings. It's just like
Cool.
it was like incredibly cool.
Yeah. That
It was
sounds
incredibly
fun.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to get that for sure.
Oh yes, you do. You want to get like 2 of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, this is kind of in the same vein of recommending things. So I'll just kind of
Okay.
prompt you a couple categories and you can recommend things. So
Okay.
let's start with music, since you're a music guy. So
Oh, yeah.
what have you been listening to lately? What is something that you think people should check out or listen to, or something, you know, of all time that you love? Anything you want to share related to music?
Music-wise, it's really difficult to assign music to people because, you know, everyone has their preferences. So my best friend is a huge hip hop guy, right? And he's like the biggest photographer in hip hop history, right? This guy Jonathan Mannion. He used to just boom hip hop out of his room, and I was like, dude, I don't get it, you know. And I'd have opera and classical music going on in my room, and he didn't get it. And over the years, you know, he finally asked me a couple years ago, can you do a playlist for me in classical music? And I was like, absolutely, I can do a playlist in classical music. Would you do the same for me with hip hop? So, you know, it's difficult to recommend something and say everyone's going to love this. That said, for me, it's Bach. There is something about Johann Sebastian Bach that I think is the closest that I've ever heard to, as a follow-up to your question before, to God. There are moments in his music where I feel like he is expressing something that he's speaking to me directly from 350 years ago. When my mother passed, I heard a piece that by him I'd never heard, and I thought I had heard everything. I'm an avid collector, and it just brought me to tears. And afterwards, I realized, I did research on it. He had written it right before his brother had gone off to war, and clearly here was someone who was afraid of losing someone who he deeply loved. There are moments where he throws me into such extraordinary, like, moments of bliss that it's like he is speaking directly from God or the angels. It's a strange thing, but somehow we connected, me and Bach. You know, when I was 4, my father came charging into my room at about 5 in the morning. I am guessing because it was dark outside, and I was playing music on my little plastic Fisher-Price radio, my Fisher-Price record player. And, you know, he charged in. He goes, what the hell is... And he stopped. He goes, is that Bach? I said, yeah. And he said, okay, it's okay. Can you turn it down a little bit? And he was so happy. But I think ever since I first heard Bach, there has been a connection that makes me know that someone else out there understood me. And I think when it comes to music, no matter what you're listening to, when you feel understood, when you feel heard, it's like having a great relationship. It means you know that you're not alone. And there may not be anything more beautiful in life than that.
Yeah, I think that's why art is so great. Like a movie that makes you feel less alone, or music that makes you feel less alone, or a book, or a podcast. I think that's what we all are seeking.
Yes, 100%. I think you put that beautifully.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. And good times and bad times.
Yeah.
You
Just to
know
see
you're
ourselves.
not alone.
Yeah, to see it reflected. Yeah. Okay, so
right.
Speaking of movie then, what's a movie that you always love, or something you've seen recently that you want to recommend?
I'm a big fan of movies. There are a number that I love. You know, I guess I could talk about a couple. The movie that moved me really profoundly a couple of years ago was a movie called The Tree of Life by Terrence Malick. And some people walked out of the theater, but as soon as it was over, I turned to the person I was with and I said, I need to go for a walk by myself. And I did. And I went back and saw it again the next weekend. It just, I think as a new father at the time, having someone who had experienced death recently of a family member, it spoke so profoundly about those joys and challenges in life. And that was really wonderful. So Tree of Life really, really moved me. When it comes to the question of happiness and excellence, the idea of pursuing something we're passionate about, and that's something that I think passion is the thing I'm most passionate about right now. The movie Whiplash that came out about 2 years ago, I thought spoke profoundly to that, which is how do we pursue something in life that is incredibly meaningful to us? When are the pathways healthy and when are they really unhealthy? I think that movie does it better than anything I've I've ever seen.
Yeah. Same director as La La Land.
Yeah, exactly, which I have not seen yet. I'm dying to see. I totally was ready for it. My boy totally wants to see it. So, and he sings and acts and dances and stuff. So we were all queued up yesterday, and I realized it wasn't available yet on iTunes. I was
Oh
like,
no.
dude, I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
So,
you'll have to take him to the theater.
you know what? It was still out there. I'd take him there in a heartbeat.
Oh, you're in like that weird in between
Yeah,
moment.
exactly. Exactly. But when he and I went to see Sing, all right, there's a movie. He and I went to see Sing. I don't think I've laughed that hard in a long, long time. Sing was awesome.
Cool.
Sing was awesome.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Last but not least, book. Any book that you want to recommend to people other than your own, which of course is available and people should definitely check out?
Thank you for saying so. The book that changed. There are a number of books that I found were key to my. That were how do I put it? Sort of like we talked about with music. They were there when I needed them the most. That they made me understand that I was not alone. But the book that always stands out for me is a book called The Gift. It's by Lewis Hyde, Hyde, and it's got to be 35 years old now. But I had gone to see my mentor, my college mentor, about 10 years ago, and I had taken him. I went to see him, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "No, I'm doing this and doing that and doing the other. Doing any writing?" Because he's a lit professor. I said, "Yeah, I'm doing some kind of writing, but it's really for myself." He said, "Let me see it." And I said, "No, Ron. Of all people, you're not allowed to see it." His name was Ron Sharp. He was the former editor of the Kenyon Review literary journal and head of the English department at Kenyon. He said, "You are not allowed to see it." And he cajoled and pushed and prodded. Fine. So I finally sent it to him, and he called me. It's about 80 pages of it. And he called me and he said, "I want you to come up and stay the night with me and Ines, his wife, and I want to talk to you about what you sent me." So I went up there, and he said, "There's something here. There's something special here." And I said, "Ron, why the beep would anyone want to read what I had to say?" It was really a journal on dealing with my mother's cancer and issues that I had, and even my son's illness, and he didn't. People would want to hear it. He just started talking about a book he wanted me to read, and it was this book. It was The Gift. And in The Gift, which is kind of meditation, philosophy, on the gifts we give others, the basic idea is when we give of ourselves freely, without expectation of return, whether it's writing a book or creating a work of art or giving an object, when we give it without expecting anything in return, that is when we can really experience the greatest sense of generosity and gratitude. And really, that's when we're ourselves. So when we offer, as you do, a podcast, or if I offer a book, or I'd say a lecture, or a keynote, or just a conversation, without abandoning, without considering how much I'm getting paid, or without considering what the knock-on effect of my career is, that's when we're really living our lives most fully. And The Gift is beautiful that way.
Yeah, that's great. I'll have to check out that book for sure. Well, thank you so much for that and everything you shared. It was really nice to meet you and chat with you. And the name of this podcast is Let It Out. So when I offer that to you to let it out, is there anything else that you feel like you want to share that you didn't get to? Or I just want to make sure we've completely wrung you dry for everything.
Here's what I'm going to say. What I'm going to say is this. Everyone out there wants to be great at something. They want to be great in their work. They want to be great in their lives, as partners, as friends, as mothers, as fathers, as professionals, you name it. And everyone out there, for the most part, wants to live a fulfilling life. They want to have well-being. Both of those things are absolutely possible. I think when you get to a certain point, one of the thing that we must be aware of is that being unique is not necessarily the easiest thing in the world. Pursuing that thing that you're most passionate about in the way that's right for you, not right for somebody else, not right for your neighbor, not right for your teacher, not right for anybody, is hard. And that bravery goes That requires bravery if we're going to get there. You know, my favorite line to describe this, and maybe in all of literature, is Walt Whitman. The line, "I sound my barbaric yawp over the roofs of the world." A lot of us know that line because we saw Ethan Hawke yawp in Dead Poets Society. And a lot of us know that line because we've read Song of Myself. But the line that comes before it is the line that really gets me, and that's sort of how what I want to share with everyone, which is Whitman writes, "I too am untranslatable." And I read that line, I think, you're Walt Whitman. You can't be untranslatable. You are one of the great masters of language. But I think it's important for us all to understand that all of us are untranslatable. The word yawp is a word that Whitman made up because he didn't have a word to describe himself. And a lot of us struggle to describe ourselves in language. And that can often be the ceiling that we hit, the barrier that we face. Sometimes letting it out, being who you are, means letting out that yawp. It means knowing that you're unable to put into words who you are. And it means just taking action in the service of pursuing those things that are most important to you, that make you who you are. So I encourage people to take that one brave step, that final brave step. And in doing so, really pursue that unique voice of theirs and the unique life that's possible for us all.
That was great. So well said, just like everything else. Thank you again so much for doing this podcast. That was great.
Well, thank you so much for having me on this podcast. You're wonderful. I mean, you know what? I got to tell you, podcasts are made by the interviewers. So, thank you for asking great questions.
All right, that was my conversation with Dan Lerner. I hope you guys learned a lot from that. I know I did, and I just had a great time talking with him. He was a really, really nice guy. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to the podcast as always. I'm so happy that you're still listening right now to my ramblings. And we mentioned the Via Strengths personality test, and like I said, I took it, and my top strength was kindness. And this is what it said about my strength. It says, I feel kind of weird telling you my strength. It sounds like I'm tooting my own horn, but really, this is just what the personality test said. So this is what it says. Your top strength is kindness, which means you have a strong tendency to be nice to people. You find it easy and pleasurable to help others, and you act kindly for its own sake rather than some other benefit. And then it says, sign up to try your free Via Strengths test. Anyway, if you guys want to do it, it's free online. You can also purchase to find more information. I didn't do that, but I don't know, maybe I should. Let me know what your strengths are. And also, if you're still listening right now, the emoji for this week's episode is the trophy. It's, a golden trophy is what it is. And I think you deserve a trophy for listening all the way to the end, for listening perhaps every week, or perhaps you're new. Either way, you meandered your way to this long, tangential conversation with me and this guy named Dan Lerner, So thank you for listening. I love you guys. If you like this podcast, if it gives you value, if it makes you feel less alone, if it makes you smile, keep listening because the guests are different every week. And they're, I was like, are people going to like this episode? I hope so. Hopefully you do. But just know that I have a lot of diverse guests on, and check out the archives if you want to learn more about what I do here, and check out the future episodes if you want to hear more. That's a great way to do it. And leave a review on iTunes, share it with a friend. That helps out the show a lot. What also helps is if you support the lovely sponsors of the podcast, like Care of Supplements. And again, I just love them. They're great. If you go to takecareof.com, you can take your personalized quiz, and then you can get your personalized, beautifully packaged, high-quality supplements specific to you. And if you use the code Katie at checkout, that's KATIE at checkout, you can get 50% off your order. All right, another thing I just want to say, they're not even a sponsor this week, but I'm just going to plug Dr. Ginger's toothpaste. They were a sponsor weeks ago, like maybe even a month ago, but I use their toothpaste and I'm obsessed with it. It tastes so good. I'm actually excited to brush my teeth. She also makes an oil-pulling-esque mouthwash with coconut oil. And anyway, ever since I had her on the podcast, Dr. Ginger, she's a dentist who came up with these holistic products with great ingredients. Anyway, if you want to use the code COCO2017, that's COCO2017, COCO2017, 15% off your next order on Amazon. Anyway, I love them. I also love Care of Supplements, and I love you guys. And thank you so much for listening. I will talk to you next week on Wednesday. That's when these episodes come out. And remember, the emoji, if you're still listening to me rambling, it's the trophy. You deserve a trophy. We all deserve a trophy. Should we design trophies that say "Let It Out" and keep? That's kind of cheesy. That's dumb. I forget it. I pretend I never said that. Could edit it out, but I'm not. We're just gonna go with it. All right. I love you. Send me the trophy. You can comment it on Instagram. You can tweet it at me. My handle everywhere is @KatieDalebout. That's my name. And again, you guys are great, especially rambly this week. All right. Let's just end it here. Bye.